The rain fell harder than anyone expected that evening. It wasn't just another storm. It was the kind of rain that blurred memories, washed away footprints, and made every goodbye feel permanent. At the edge of a small village stood 17-year-old Ethan Carter, soaked from head to toe. Across from him was Lily Brooks, holding a worn-out red umbrella that barely protected either of them. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence carries more weight than words. The train whistle echoed through the valley. Ethan looked toward the station. His military enlistment papers were folded carefully inside his jacket. Tomorrow he would leave. He had dreamed about serving his country ever since he was a child, but now that the moment had finally arrived, nothing felt exciting anymore. Because leaving meant leaving Lily. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny silver compass. "My father gave me this before he died," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "I can't take it." "You have to." She gently placed it into his palm. "So, you'll always find your way back to me." His eyes filled with tears. "I promise." She smiled through her own tears. "No matter how long it takes? No matter how long? No matter what happens?" He squeezed her hand. "I'll come home." The train whistle sounded again. This time it was closer. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "The last thing I'll ever break is my promise." Neither of them knew those words would haunt both of them for the next 20 years. The following morning, Ethan boarded the train. Lily watched until it disappeared beyond the mountains. Every day afterward, she walked to the station. Every single day. At first, the villagers admired her loyalty. Months passed, then years. Eventually, people started whispering, "He isn't coming back. You should move on." He probably forgot, but Lily never believed them, because promises mattered, especially his. Every Sunday, she placed fresh flowers beside the old oak tree where they had first met. Every birthday, she wrote him another letter. None of them were ever mailed. She kept them inside a wooden box beneath her bed. Waiting, believing, hoping. Meanwhile, war changed Ethan. The cheerful village boy slowly disappeared beneath layers of mud, smoke, and endless nights. He witnessed friends die. He carried wounded strangers across battlefields. He survived explosions that should have killed him. Every night before sleeping, he held Lily's compass. North. Always pointing home. That tiny silver compass became the only piece of peace he still possessed. Whenever fear surrounded him, he remembered her smile beneath the rain. "I promise." Those words became stronger than bullets. One winter morning, his platoon was sent on a rescue mission deep inside enemy territory. Everything went wrong. Their convoy was ambushed. Vehicles exploded. Communication was destroyed. Hours later, only a handful of soldiers remained alive. Ethan helped save several injured teammates before another explosion threw him into a freezing river. When he finally reached the shore, he collapsed. The military later listed him as missing in action. No body. No confirmation. Only silence. Back home, 2 officers knocked on Lily's door. She already knew why they had come. One handed her a folded flag. The other spoke carefully. "We're very sorry." Her hands trembled. "Did you find him?" "No." "Then he's alive." The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We have to prepare families for every possibility." She looked directly into their eyes. "He promised me." Neither officer had an answer. Years passed. Children who had once watched Ethan leave became adults. The train station changed. The village changed. Even the old oak tree grew larger. Only Lily remained the same. Every evening, she watched the final train arrive. Every evening, she looked at every face stepping onto the platform. Every evening, she walked home alone. Until one autumn afternoon, a stranger appeared. He wore a dark coat. His beard was streaked with gray. A long scar crossed the left side of his face. In his hand, he held a silver compass. Lily's heart stopped. The stranger looked around the village, as if searching for something he had lost decades ago. Then he whispered, "I'm finally home." Chapter 2: The Man Who Came Back. For a long moment, Lily couldn't breathe. The old train station faded into the background. The chatter of passengers, the rumble of luggage, even the sound of the departing train seemed to disappear. All she could see was the silver compass in the stranger's hand. It was scratched along one side. The tiny crack near the glass was exactly where it had been 20 years ago. There was no mistake. It was hers. Her legs carried her forward before her mind could catch up. The stranger looked up. Their eyes met. His expression changed. Hope, disbelief, then overwhelming sorrow. Lily. His voice was rough, deeper than she remembered, but it carried the same warmth that had lived inside her memories for 2 decades. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Ethan. She reached out with trembling fingers. He did the same. For one impossible second, it felt as though time itself had stopped. But before their hands could touch, Ethan staggered backward. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the station platform. People rushed toward him. Someone called for a doctor. Another passenger fetched water. Lily knelt beside him, cradling his head in her lap. His face was pale. His breathing was uneven. The years had not been kind to him. Scars covered his hands. One sleeve hid what appeared to be an old burn stretching up his arm. Even asleep, he looked exhausted. The village doctor arrived within minutes. After examining Ethan, he looked at Lily with concern. He's severely malnourished. He needs rest. And judging by these scars... The doctor paused. I don't think his suffering ended when the war did. That night Ethan slept in the same small clinic where he had been born. Outside, the entire village gathered. Everyone had heard the impossible news. The missing soldier came home. It really is Ethan Carter. I thought he was dead. So did everyone else. The old villagers remembered the cheerful boy who had left with dreams of honor. The man who returned looked like someone carrying the weight of an entire lifetime. The next morning, Ethan finally opened his eyes. For several seconds, he stared at the ceiling. Then panic flashed across his face. He shot upright. Where am I? You're safe. Lily's gentle voice calmed him instantly. He turned toward her. For a long while, neither of them spoke. 20 years of questions filled the silence. Finally, Ethan smiled. I made it. A tear rolled down Lily's cheek. You kept your promise. He laughed softly. It only took me 20 years. She laughed through her tears. Then, without another word, she embraced him. For the first time since the war began, Ethan cried. Not quietly. Not like a soldier trying to stay strong. He cried like the 17-year-old boy who had left beneath the rain. Days passed. Little by little, Ethan began telling his story. After the explosion by the river, he had survived, but barely. Enemy soldiers found him unconscious and took him prisoner. For years, he was moved from one prison camp to another. Letters were never delivered. His name disappeared from official records. Many prisoners died. Some lost hope. Others forgot their own names. But Ethan refused to forget one thing. His promise. Every night he repeated it to himself. I'll go home. I'll go home. I'll go home. It became more than a promise. It became the reason he stayed alive. Eventually, the war ended. But freedom didn't come. The camp had been abandoned in a remote region. Without documents or money, Ethan wandered from country to country. He worked wherever he could. Construction, fishing boats, factories. Anything that earned enough for another step toward home. Sometimes he was cheated. Sometimes robbed. Once he spent an entire winter sleeping beneath a bridge. Still, he never sold the compass. Not once. There were days, he admitted quietly, when I had nothing to eat. Lily listened with tears in her eyes. But I couldn't sell it, because if I lost this... He looked at the compass. I thought I might lose my way back to you. News of Ethan's return spread far beyond the village. Journalists arrived. Television crews requested interviews. Military officials contacted him. They wanted ceremonies, awards, speeches, recognition. Ethan politely declined every invitation. I didn't come home to become famous. I came home because someone was waiting. The reporters loved that answer. Within days, newspapers across the country carried the same headline. The soldier who kept his last promise. But not everyone celebrated. One evening, an unfamiliar black car stopped outside the clinic. Two men in expensive suits stepped out. They introduced themselves as government investigators. "There are questions about your identity," one of them said. "Questions?" Lily repeated. The older investigator nodded. "Officially, Captain Ethan Carter died 20 years ago. His military pension has already been settled. His records were closed." Ethan frowned. "I'm standing right here." The investigator sighed. "Legally, you don't exist." The room fell silent. After surviving war, prison, hunger, and 20 years of searching for home, Ethan now faced a battle he had never expected. He would have to prove he was the man he had always been. And someone somewhere didn't want that to happen. A ghost in his own country. The news spread through the village faster than the morning wind. The government says Ethan doesn't exist. People couldn't believe it. How could a man stand in front of them, speak with them, laugh with them, and yet, according to official records, be dead? For Ethan, it felt almost unreal. He had survived bombs, starvation, freezing winters, and years of captivity. Yet the hardest battle of his life had only just begun. 3 days later, Ethan and Lily traveled to the regional military office. The building was larger than Ethan remembered. The old brick walls had been replaced with glass and steel. Young soldiers walked confidently through the entrance, saluting officers who were younger than Ethan felt inside. At the reception desk, a lieutenant looked at his documents. Or rather, what little remained of them. A faded military tag. The silver compass. A torn photograph of Ethan and Lily standing beneath the old oak tree. The lieutenant frowned. "I'm sorry. These aren't enough." Ethan stared at him. "I served for 4 years. I disappeared during the Red Valley Rescue Mission. My commanding officer was Colonel James Whitmore." The lieutenant typed rapidly. A moment later, his face changed. "I'm sorry. Colonel Whitmore passed away 8 years ago." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. Another piece of his old life. Gone forever. An hour later, they were escorted into a conference room. 3 officials waited inside. Stacks of files covered the long wooden table. One of the men adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Carter." Ethan interrupted. "It's Captain Carter." The official nodded politely. "According to our records, Captain Ethan Carter was declared deceased after being missing for 7 years. His estate was legally closed. His military insurance was distributed. His death certificate was issued." Lily frowned. "But he never died." "Unfortunately," the official replied, "the law doesn't always keep pace with reality." Another officer slid a thick folder across the table. "We'll need proof. DNA testing. Military records. Witness statements. Medical examinations. Psychological evaluations." The list seemed endless. Ethan sighed. "So I have to prove I'm alive." The room fell silent. Even the officials looked uncomfortable. As Ethan and Lily left the building, an elderly janitor stepped into the hallway. He stared at Ethan for several seconds. Then his eyes widened. "Captain?" Ethan turned. The old man dropped his mop. "No, it can't be." Then he smiled. "I knew you'd come home." Ethan looked closely. The face was older, the hair almost completely white. But then he recognized him. "Samuel?" The janitor laughed. "You still remember me." Samuel had been a young maintenance worker on Ethan's military base before the war. They had shared countless cups of coffee. He had watched Ethan board the transport truck on the day of deployment. Samuel embraced him tightly. "I told everyone you weren't dead. They laughed at me. I never stopped believing." For the first time since entering the building, Ethan smiled. Samuel's testimony became the first official witness statement. Soon others came forward. Former soldiers, neighbors, teachers, friends from childhood. Each story painted another piece of Ethan's forgotten life. Slowly, the impossible became undeniable. But while hope was growing, someone else was growing nervous. Late that evening, inside an expensive office hundreds of miles away, a man watched Ethan's interview on television. His name was Richard Hale. 20 years earlier, he had served as a military logistics officer. Today he was a wealthy businessman with powerful political connections. When Ethan's face appeared on the screen, Richard's coffee cup slipped from his hand. It shattered across the floor. "No," he whispered. "He's supposed to be dead." His assistant looked confused. "Sir?" Richard ignored him. Instead, he opened an old locked drawer. Inside lay a classified military file. Across the cover were the words, "Red Valley Incident," and beneath them, one name, Captain Ethan Carter. Richard's hands began to shake. "If he remembers," he whispered. "I'm finished." Back in the village, Ethan couldn't sleep. The nightmares had returned. He saw explosions, burning vehicles, soldiers screaming for help. Then something different. A memory, one he hadn't thought about in years. Before the ambush, he had seen someone, a familiar officer, standing beside enemy scouts. At the time, Ethan had believed he was imagining things. But now, the face became clearer. Richard Hale. Ethan sat upright in bed, breathing heavily. "No," he whispered. It wasn't an accident. The next morning, Lily found him sitting beneath the old oak tree. He looked different. Not frightened. Determined. "I remembered something." She sat beside him. "What is it?" Ethan looked toward the rising sun. "The mission? It wasn't just an ambush. I think someone betrayed us." Lily's expression changed instantly. "You mean?" He nodded slowly. "If I'm right, then 23 soldiers didn't die because of the enemy. They died because someone sold us." A cold silence settled between them. For 20 years, Ethan had believed he was simply unlucky. Now, for the first time, he realized the truth could be far more dangerous than the war itself. Some promises bring people home. Others awaken secrets that powerful people will do anything to keep buried. The secret buried in Red Valley. The following morning, Ethan couldn't shake the memory. It had returned in fragments. Not clear enough to prove anything, but too vivid to ignore. He remembered the convoy. 24 soldiers. 6 armored vehicles. A rescue mission so confidential that only a handful of officers had known its exact route. Yet the enemy had been waiting. Not searching. Not guessing. Waiting. Every roadblock had been perfectly positioned. Every sniper had known exactly where to hide. The attack had lasted less than 15 minutes. By the time it ended, most of Ethan's platoon was gone. Lily poured him a cup of coffee. "You've been staring at that map for an hour." Ethan traced a finger across the faded military map spread across the kitchen table. "It still doesn't make sense." "What doesn't?" "The ambush." He pointed to the winding mountain road. "If they had discovered us by chance, they would have attacked here." His finger moved farther down the route. "Or here." Instead, he tapped a narrow canyon. "They waited for the only place where we couldn't escape." Lily looked at him carefully. "You really think someone betrayed you?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and unfolded a weathered piece of paper. "I found this sewn into the lining of my jacket after I came home." The paper was stained, torn, and barely readable. Across the top were 3 handwritten words. "Route changed, confirmed." Below them was a signature. Only one letter remained visible. R. At first, Ethan had assumed the note meant nothing. Now, it felt like the missing piece of a puzzle. That afternoon, Ethan visited the military cemetery. Rows upon rows of white headstones stretched across the hillside. Some carried names. Others simply read, "Unknown soldier." He stopped before one particular grave. Sergeant Daniel Ross. Best friend. Brother in everything but blood. Daniel had joined the army with Ethan. They had survived, training together. Promised to watch each other's backs. But Daniel never came home. Ethan knelt quietly. "I'm sorry. I couldn't save you." The wind whispered through the trees. For a long time, he simply sat there. As he stood to leave, he noticed someone watching him. An elderly woman approached slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. Her eyes were kind, but tired. "You must be Ethan." He nodded politely. "I'm Daniel's mother." Ethan's heart sank. For 20 years he had imagined this meeting. None of those imagined conversations prepared him for reality. Before he could speak, she embraced him. "I've waited a long time to thank you." His voice broke. "I failed him." She stepped back and looked him straight in the eyes.
No.
"My son wrote me one last letter." She reached into her handbag and removed an old envelope. "I think it belongs to you now." The letter had been written 2 days before the mission. The paper had yellowed with age. Daniel's handwriting remained unmistakable. "If anything happens to me, tell Ethan not to blame himself. We've both noticed strange things. Someone higher up knows more than they're saying. If we don't make it back, tell him to keep asking questions. The truth always survives." Ethan read the final sentence 3 times. His hands trembled. Daniel had suspected betrayal before the mission even began. That evening, hundreds of miles away, Richard Hale sat alone in his office. The television displayed another news report: the soldier who returned after 20 years. Richard switched it off immediately. His breathing grew heavier. He opened a safe hidden behind a painting. Inside was a thick red folder, stamped across the front, "Top Secret." He flipped through photographs, military maps, financial records, encrypted messages. Finally, he reached a single black and white photograph. It showed Ethan's convoy leaving the base. On the back, someone had written, "Payment received. Operation confirmed." Richard closed his eyes. It should have stayed buried.
His phone rang.
He answered immediately. A cold voice spoke. "Is Ethan Carter remembering?" Richard hesitated. "Yes." A long silence followed. Then came the reply. "Make sure he doesn't remember anything else." The line went dead. Richard stared at the phone. For the first time in years, he looked afraid. Back in the village, Ethan couldn't sleep again. Near midnight, he stepped outside. The streets were empty. The old oak tree stood quietly beneath the moonlight. As he approached it, something caught his eye. A small package rested against the trunk. No name, no return address. Inside was an old military notebook. On the first page were only 6 handwritten words. "I know what happened at Red Valley." Beneath them,
A date.
and "a meeting place. Tomorrow night. Alone." Ethan closed the notebook slowly. Somewhere, someone had been waiting for him to come home. And whatever truth waited at that meeting had remained hidden for 20 years. The stranger in the shadows. Ethan didn't tell Lily about the notebook. Not immediately. He sat at the kitchen table long after sunrise, turning its worn pages over and over in his hands. There was nothing else inside. No signature, no clues, no explanation. Just one chilling sentence. "I know what happened at Red Valley." And beneath it, "A meeting place. Blackstone Bridge. 10 p.m. Come alone." All day, the words echoed in his mind. Who had left it? A former soldier? An enemy? Someone who wanted to help? Or someone setting a trap? Lily noticed the change in him. "You've barely said a word." "I'm just tired." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Ethan." He looked into her eyes. "For 20 years, you've carried everything alone. You don't have to anymore." For a moment, he almost told her. Almost. But if this was dangerous, he couldn't risk her life. He forced a smile. "I'll be okay." She smiled back. But something in her heart whispered that he wasn't telling the whole truth. That evening, the sky darkened with heavy clouds. Rain began to fall. Not a storm. Just enough to make the streets glisten beneath the old streetlights. At exactly 9:45 p.m., Ethan quietly left the house. The silver compass rested in his pocket. It had guided him home once. Tonight, he hoped it would guide him to the truth. Blackstone Bridge had been abandoned for years. The old railway tracks crossing it were covered in rust. Broken wooden planks creaked beneath Ethan's boots as he stepped onto the bridge. The river below rushed through the darkness. He checked his watch. 9:59.
Then,
Footsteps.
slow.
Careful. Someone emerged from the shadows. An elderly man wearing a dark coat and a flat cap. His beard was gray. One arm rested inside a sling. "Ethan Carter?" Ethan nodded cautiously. "Who are you?" The old man smiled faintly. "My name is Victor Hayes. I served with military intelligence." Ethan frowned. I've never heard of you. You weren't supposed to. Victor looked around before speaking again. Everything that happened at Red Valley, it wasn't an accident. Ethan's heart pounded. Victor reached into his coat and removed a small metal box. Inside were several faded photographs, military maps, and an old cassette tape. I've kept these hidden for 20 years. Why? Because everyone else who knew the truth. Victor paused. Ended up dead. The cold air suddenly felt even colder. Victor spread one of the photographs across the bridge railing. It showed Ethan's convoy leaving the military base. But this time, something new caught Ethan's attention. Parked beside the convoy was a black government vehicle. Standing next to it, Richard Hale. And beside Richard, a man Ethan had never seen before.
Victor pointed to him.
That's Adrian Mercer. Who is he? Victor's face hardened. He wasn't one of ours. He was working for the enemy. Ethan stared at the photograph. You're saying? Victor nodded. The convoy route was sold. For money. 23 soldiers died because someone betrayed them. Ethan felt anger rising inside him. I knew it. Victor looked directly into his eyes.
No.
You remembered part of it, but there's something you still don't know. Victor pressed the play button on the old cassette recorder. Static filled the air. Then voices. A conversation recorded more than 20 years earlier. Voice 1. The payment has been transferred. Voice 2. What about the soldiers? They won't survive the canyon. And Captain Carter? A brief silence. Then, make sure he doesn't come back. Ethan froze. He recognized the second voice immediately. Richard Hale. Before Ethan could say a word, a bright light suddenly flooded the bridge.
Headlights.
2 black SUVs raced toward them. Victor's eyes widened. They found us. The vehicle screeched to a stop. 4 masked men jumped out. Run! Victor shouted. The first gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet struck the bridge railing inches from Ethan's head. Wood splintered everywhere. Another shot rang out. Victor shoved Ethan behind a support beam. They're here for the evidence. The attackers advanced quickly. One grabbed the metal box. Victor fought back, striking him with his cane. The box fell, scattering photographs across the wet bridge. Rain soaked the papers instantly. Ethan lunged forward, collecting as many as he could. Another bullet ricocheted off the steel tracks. Go! Victor yelled. I'll hold them. I'm not leaving you. You made someone a promise 20 years ago. Victor shouted. Don't break it now. Those words hit Ethan like lightning. The last promise. He hesitated for only a second. Then he ran. Behind him, more gunshots echoed through the night. Victor's voice disappeared beneath the sound of the storm. By the time Ethan reached the far side of the bridge, silence.
He turned back.
The SUVs were already speeding away. Victor was gone. Only the rain remained, and scattered across the bridge. One blood-stained photograph. Ethan picked it up. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were 5 chilling words. There is another traitor alive. Ethan stood frozen as thunder rolled across the sky. Richard Hale wasn't acting alone. Someone else, someone still hidden, had spent 20 years protecting the truth. And now they knew Ethan was getting closer. The blood-stained photograph. The rain didn't stop until dawn. By the time Ethan reached home, his clothes were soaked, his hands were trembling, and the blood-stained photograph was still clutched tightly in his fist. He stood outside the front door for several minutes. How could he explain any of this to Lily?
He couldn't.
Not yet. But as soon as he opened the door, he realized she already knew something was wrong. She had been sitting awake in the living room all night. The lamp beside her was still on. You weren't taking a walk, she said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It was heartbreak. Ethan looked down.
No.
She stood and slowly walked toward him. Then she noticed the blood on his sleeve. Her face turned pale. Ethan, whose blood is that? He hesitated. I don't know. For the first time since he'd returned home. Lily looked afraid. After washing up, Ethan finally told her everything. The notebook. The meeting. Victor Hayes. The recording. The attack. Every single detail. When he finished, the room fell silent. Lily stared at the photograph lying on the table. There is another traitor alive. She read the words aloud. So Richard Hale wasn't the only one. Ethan nodded. If Victor was telling the truth, someone has been helping him cover this up for 20 years. And now they know you're alive. He looked out the window. They'll come again. That afternoon, Ethan drove back to Blackstone Bridge with the local sheriff. The bridge was empty. No bodies. No shell casings. No vehicles. It looked as though nothing had happened. The sheriff frowned. You sure this is the place? Ethan pointed to the broken railing. Fresh bullet holes marked the steel beams. Splintered wood still littered the tracks. I'm sure. The sheriff examined the damage. Someone cleaned this place in a hurry. Professional. Too professional. As they searched the bridge, Ethan noticed something caught beneath one of the old railway ties. A small leather wallet.
It was soaked but intact.
Inside was an identification card. Victor Hayes, former Military Intelligence Division. There was also a folded piece of paper. On it was an address. Not a house. A storage facility. Locker 117. 2 hours later, Ethan and the sheriff arrived at the old warehouse district. Most of the buildings had been abandoned years ago. The storage facility sat quietly at the end of a street. Rust covered its gates. The manager, an elderly man with thick glasses, searched through decades-old records. Locker 117? He scratched his head. No one's rented that locker in years. But it's still paid for. Paid by whom? The manager shrugged.
Cash.
Every January. For 21 years. The key from Victor's wallet fit perfectly. The heavy metal door creaked open. Inside,
There was only one wooden chest.
dust covered every inch of it. Ethan lifted the lid slowly. His heart skipped a beat. The chest was filled with military files. Photographs, audio tapes, maps, newspaper clippings, dozens of handwritten journals. Victor had spent 20 years documenting everything. The sheriff looked stunned. My God. At the bottom of the chest lay a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "For Captain Ethan Carter." His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a letter. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I either failed to meet you again, or I didn't survive. If that's the case, don't waste time looking for me. Find the file marked Project Raven. Everything begins there. You trusted the wrong officers. One betrayed your mission. The other betrayed your country. But neither of them was the mastermind. The person you seek wore the highest uniform in the room. I never learned his name. Only his code name. The General. Ethan read the last 2 words twice. The General. Not a rank. A code name. Someone powerful enough to erase military records. Someone powerful enough to fake deaths. Someone powerful enough to silence witnesses for 20 years. The sheriff opened another folder. Inside were bank records, large payments, foreign accounts, dates that matched military operations. Every payment traced back to one company, Horizon Global Logistics. The name meant nothing to Ethan, but the sheriff's expression changed immediately. I know this company. What is it? They've had government defense contracts for decades. Owned by Richard Hale. Ethan clenched his fists. So, the money trail leads straight to him. The sheriff nodded. But if Victor's letter is right, Hale wasn't giving the orders. He was taking them. Just then, a loud engine roared outside. Tires screeched. The warehouse windows exploded inward as bullets ripped through the glass. Down, the sheriff shouted. Both men hit the floor as gunfire echoed through the building. Wood splintered. Metal shelves crashed to the ground. Someone outside yelled, "Burn the warehouse." A bottle filled with gasoline smashed through a broken window. Flames erupted instantly. Within seconds, the old building became an inferno. Smoke filled the room. The evidence. The files. Victor's journals. Everything was about to be destroyed. Ethan grabbed the chest. It's too heavy. The sheriff coughed violently. Leave it. I can't. This is the only proof we have. The ceiling groaned above them. A burning beam crashed to the floor, blocking the only exit. The fire was closing in. And outside, The attackers were waiting. Through the fire, the warehouse shook violently. Wood cracked. Steel groaned. Smoke poured through every corner of the building, turning the air thick and impossible to breathe. Ethan pulled his shirt over his nose. The sheriff was already coughing uncontrollably. "We've got less than a minute," the sheriff shouted. A burning beam crashed behind them, sending sparks flying across the floor. The only exit was gone. Ethan looked around desperately. Years of military training took over. He forced himself to ignore the panic. Every building had another way out. Every building. He just had to find it. His eyes landed on an old freight elevator at the back of the warehouse. The doors had rusted shut years ago. But beside it, a maintenance hatch. He ran toward it.
Locked.
Without hesitation, Ethan kicked it once. Nothing.
Twice.
The metal bent. On the third kick, the lock snapped. A narrow tunnel stretched beneath the warehouse. The sheriff crawled inside first. "Hurry." Ethan looked back at Victor's chest. It was too large to fit through the opening. For one painful moment, he considered leaving it behind. Then he noticed something. Inside the chest was a smaller steel case, hidden beneath a false wooden bottom. He lifted it free. Much lighter. Much stronger. Whatever Victor had wanted to protect the most, it was inside this case. Ethan grabbed it and disappeared into the tunnel just as the roof collapsed behind him. The explosion echoed across the warehouse district. Outside, masked men watched the building disappear into flames. One of them lowered his rifle. No one survives that. A black sedan parked nearby. Its rear window slowly rolled down. Richard Hale sat inside. He stared silently at the burning building. "Did you see the bodies?" The gunman hesitated.
No.
Richard's expression hardened. "Then don't assume anything." He rolled the window back up. The car drove away before the fire department arrived. Nearly 200 yards from the warehouse, a rusted drainage cover lifted. The sheriff climbed out first, gasping for fresh air. Ethan emerged behind him, still carrying the steel case. Within seconds, they heard sirens approaching. The sheriff looked back toward the fire. "They're going to think we died in there." Ethan looked at the smoke rising into the night sky. Maybe that's exactly what we need. For the next 2 days, Ethan and the sheriff stayed hidden in an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the Pine Ridge forest. The news spread quickly. Mysterious fire destroys historic warehouse. 2 men believed dead. Richard Hale watched the report from his office. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. "It's over," he whispered. But he was wrong. Inside the cabin, Ethan finally examined the steel case. It had no keyhole. Instead, it used a 3-number combination lock. Attached to the handle was a faded note in Victor's handwriting. "The answer is where your promise began." Ethan frowned. "Where my promise began?" The sheriff thought for a moment. "The train station?" Ethan shook his head.
No.
The promise didn't begin there. He closed his eyes. Then he remembered. The old oak tree. The rain. Lily handing him the silver compass. That was where he had promised to come home. He looked at the compass. On its back were 3 engraved numbers. 719. He had never noticed them before. Slowly, he turned the lock.
719. Click.
The case opened. Inside were only 3 items. A small notebook, a flash drive, and an old military photograph. The photograph showed 6 senior officers standing together before the Red Valley mission. Richard Hale was there. So was Colonel Whitmore. But standing in the center was a 4-star general wearing dark sunglasses. His face had been scratched out with a knife. On the back of the photograph, Victor had written, "This is the man known only as the General. Find his real name, and everything else will fall into place." Ethan carefully picked up the notebook. Every page contained dates, names, secret payments, and handwritten observations. Victor had been building this case for more than 20 years. Then Ethan reached for the flash drive. The sheriff smiled. "If this still works, we might finally have proof." The next morning, they borrowed an old laptop from the cabin's owner. Ethan inserted the flash drive. The screen flickered. A single folder appeared. Project Raven. Inside were dozens of classified files. military reports, financial transfers, scanned signatures. Then one file caught Ethan's attention. Video_001. He clicked it. The recording began. The image was grainy. A conference room. 5 military officials sat around a table. Richard Hale was one of them. Then a voice spoke from off-camera. Operation Raven proceeds tomorrow. Another officer asked, "What about Captain Carter's team?" The room fell silent. Then the unseen man answered calmly, "They're expendable." Ethan froze. He knew that voice. He had heard it once before. Not during the war. Not in prison. But much later, after he came home. His eyes widened. "No." The sheriff looked at him. "What?" Ethan whispered, "I know that voice. It belongs to someone who's still alive." Just then, a vehicle stopped outside the cabin. Headlights swept across the windows. 3 black SUVs. Someone had found them.